Good morning, everybody. Really pleased to be here with you today, and also with this panel, distinguished panel. I would say we're going to cover today HTA topics and market access topics in Europe and in the US as well for advanced therapies. It's a very exciting moment that we are living, of course, in terms of new ATMPs that are going to be reviewed by EMA and in Europe. New approved by FDA in the US. We had seen so far 9 ATMPs that have been approved by EMA and have been going the last year through the HTA market access and reimbursement process in Europe. So we have, I would say, a lot of experience already, or to share together today, and we have brought together here. Representatives from HTA bodies across Europe and also expertise from the US. I'd like to introduce myself very briefly. My name is Paolo Morgese. I joined ARB in September this year. I'm responsible for market access activities in Europe. My background is from the HTA side, from the industry, pharmaceutical industry, and also from the investor side, healthcare investor side, taking care of market access activities. One thing that I think is important for today's session is we have looked in the previous session. There have been discussions around pricing, access, availability, and sustainability as well. It's very important to look at this in a way that is an investment. In ATMPs, it's really an investment from the payer side, as is from the investor side, as is for society as a whole. So the only way forward, I would say, is really to give all the stakeholders involved in this discussion the right information to move forward in their investment. So I think it's very important to have this discussion with payers, HTA bodies here today to really understand what has worked so far, what didn't work, what they're doing moving forward to get these treatments available to patients. So the price tag is something that is very, it's easy to mention, it's easy to, let's say, to make through, let's say, news, or it has an impact. But reality is that society is already investing a lot of money in orphan diseases. Going back to the example of SMA patient cost over the lifetime millions to society. So every single patient costs millions. So there is a high cost or investment that is done in this patient. This is a good thing because it means that we are able to treat these patients. And we need to look at, when you discuss about pricing, we need to look at the value of these products and how they address healthcare needs in a way that is also helpful for payers, for patients, and for society as a whole. So I stop here. Really would like to have this panel to introduce themselves. We have representatives from Germany, from Belgium, from the US, from Italy, and from the UK. I would like to have a first tour the table, starting eventually from Holger, describing your role at DAC, and also let's say, introducing yourself and what DAC has done so far in this field.
Yes, thank you, Paolo. Good morning, everybody. And I was based in North Rhine-Westphalia, the most populated country, and worked for the DAC as a senior contract manager for 27 years. And the last 20 years, I was really involved in the regional regulations of prescription for sick fund in Germany, and to know what's going on the local and regional level for the prescription to bring the volume on the market and to the patients is important. Also to know what's happened on the GBA, EQUIC, and the federal pricing regulations. And I finished my employment this summer and changed to the consultant side. And That's my experiences of long time negotiation with doctors' associations, pharmaceutical industries, and so on.
Diane, please, from Belgium, also involved in many key European initiatives.
So, thank you for inviting me first. My name is Diane Kleinermans. I'm working as advisor to the Ministry of Public Health in Belgium. I'm in particular in charge of two different types of dossiers. The first one is related to clinical trial as well as the use of human body material. And another topic I'm in charge is some initiative for joint collaboration with other European countries, and in more particular the Benelux initiative, which is an initiative to give more quickly access to innovative medicine, in particular orphan drug, with high budget impact. So we try with other European countries to do that together, to be in a better position to answer to the challenge we are all facing.
Eric, please, from Evidera.
I'm Eric Faulkner. I'm a vice president with a company called Evidera, which is one of the top HER and market access firms in the world. I started out as an MA-reformed geneticist and gene therapy scientist, so I've been working in this field basically my entire career. I also lead an institute. Over my career, I've worked on approaching now 100 different assets in this category on a global basis to help organizations think about what it takes to demonstrate value and achieve market access. I also lead an institute in the U.S. that has roughly 100 commercial payer members. So I work deeply with those individuals on a range of advanced technologies, including regenerative and advanced therapies. But thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for being here. Giovanni from AIFA, Italy.
Good morning. I'm a senior HTA officer. I've been working at the Italian agency for the last 10 years, half of the time on reimbursement and pricing, and both at the national level and at the international level. You know that there are many networks going on right now, such as the HTA network, DioNet, etc. HTA, EMA, parallel scientific advice. So I've been working a lot on this these issues. Yeah.
Pilar from NICE, please.
Good morning. My name is Pilar Pinilla. I'm working in NICE Scientific Advice. We provide all sorts of services to companies or sponsors, academics, whoever is developing a new project, a product that is coming through NICE, through the NHS. To provide that early engagement in order to ensure that their plans for evidence generation are fit for purpose in terms of further access to the NHS. I've experienced working in all sorts of services in terms of scientific advice, together with the EMA, with other HTA bodies, with national regulators, with the MHRA, and I've also have experience working in the evaluation side, in technology appraisals, and highly specialized technologies program at NICE. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. And I would like to start the next round with you. Because NICE now, it's almost 20 years that is here, that's been created. I think maybe 99 or 2000, so we're getting close to 20 years that you have set up your organization and has been for years really a guide in terms of health economics, HT, at least across Europe, but worldwide. And you have invented, I would say, this approach to look at healthcare as an investment, to look at what is the return in the long term in terms of any healthcare intervention, looking at an horizon in terms of patient outcomes in the long term. And you have gone through reviews of a few or most of the ATMPs that have been approved so far in Europe. So I would like to get from you, first introduction to, what has been your experience so far? What have you perceived in terms of what was different with ATMPs, and what have you done? The activities that NICE has done to fit with these new technologies.
Yeah, thank you, Paolo. Well, that's true. We were set up in 1999, so yeah, we've been for some time here. And we are very, very excited about the current panorama that is ongoing with ATMPs. But the truth is that we are not new to that. So we've so far evaluated we have ongoing evaluation for 7 ATMPs so far. And I mean, except the one that's been withdrawn because of marketing authorizations, we've managed to recommend all of them. We have one of them that is the last one that we are currently doing, that is Strimvelis, that is recommended in draft guidance. But the truth is that we've managed to recommend them all for use within the NHS. So we are very pleased to have that access to these therapies in the NHS. And we've seen more and more, and we have more than 8 products in scoping already, more in topic selection. We've done more than 17 projects in scientific advice for ATMP, so that I think that really shows the willingness and the commitment from NICE to engage early. And I think that there are 3 key things that NICE would like to highlight in terms of working with these new therapies. And those are closer collaboration, early engagement, and creative thinking. I mean, because we need to be prepared for what's coming, and we need to be creative and proactive at the same time. And sometimes, I mean, we can conduct projects to see whether our methods and process are fit for purpose, and actually that's what we did a couple of years ago through a collaboration with the York University. It was a project prompted by the Department of Health Regenerative Medicines expert group, and we conducted that project to see and to assess whether our methods and process were fit for purpose to evaluate ATMPs. And the conclusion was that, yes, we were able to keep our methods and process, but there were certain issues that perhaps needs more attention for some of these therapies. But yeah, those 3 things are within the key issues that we need to keep in mind: closer collaboration, early engagement, and creative thinking.
Thanks a lot, Pilar. Giovanni?
I would like to mention in this respect the story of Strimvelis, which for us, it's a very successful story from a public health perspective. It's a product that has been reimbursed extremely quickly, having an orphan designation. According to the Italian legislation, you can have sort of a fast track for the pricing and reimbursement process. So this is a product that was immediately after the CHMP opinion in April 2016, reimbursed already available in August 2016. And I think it shows the fact that despite the uncertainties that you can have with this kind of therapies, if there's convincing evidence that that brings you to that kind of facilitates the process of the pricing and reimbursement decision making. And for this specific product, we also applied, it's been considered innovative. It received innovative status, and this is something I wanted to talk about because this is something new in our system. Because if a product satisfies the requirements of the unmet medical need, major therapeutic added value, and a good quality of evidence, then it can be granted the innovative status, which means financial benefits, and it means access to the regional formularies. Because as you know, we have a system that is very regionalized, so it's important to the innovative status actually allows you to have an immediate access to these formularies. So this was the story of Strimvelis. A payment by results scheme has been applied to this product with the use of a registry that became active already in August 2016, so very, very close to the CHMP opinion. So far, we have 1 patient enrolled, and then this is data that I got yesterday, actually, from the San Raffaele Hospital, because the non-resident patients, non-Italian resident patients are not tracked in our registry system. But I know that at least 2 patients have already been, 2 non-resident patients have already been treated, and that more are being assessed. And this is possible through the EU healthcare cross-border directive that allows patients to receive treatments that are not available in a specific country.
Just to clarify, Strimbelis has a market authorization in Europe and can be administered only in Italy, in the site in Italy.
Yeah.
So patients from other countries need to go to Italy to get treated. Right?
It's been the outcome of a very successful partnership between the public and private, and this product is available only at the moment at the San Raffaele Hospital in Milan. So that means that patients have to travel to Milan and to get the gene therapy. So I would say this is a very positive story. There's another product that has been and despite, I would like to say, the costs of these therapies, which, as you all know, are let's say are put a lot of stress on the healthcare budgets and on sustainability, but still it shows the intent of allowing, of course, access to patients in case of very convincing data.
Just wanted to interrupt you because I'd like to go back, and please forgive me a second, because also one of the very recent draft decision, positive draft decision, was for Strimbelis in the UK, and that will allow basically patients to travel from the UK to Italy, get reimbursement from the NHS, and get the treatment in Italy. So that's something, I don't know, maybe you want to cover now in terms of how this can be put in place and what are...
Sure, I think that in this case the committee had to deal with some sort of issues that they were not used to deal with, such as traveling to another country to get the treatment, how does it work, patient willingness to travel. So we were really lucky to have a very engaging patient organization as well through the entire process, where we are, because we are still conducting the evaluation. So the patient organization conducted a survey with all the patients to see willingness to travel to Italy to get the treatment, because that will impact on the uptake of the treatment itself, and obviously on the budget impact at the end of the day for the NHS. And actually that was very, very useful for the committee to know those figures and to see that most patients will be willing to travel to Italy, even though if that will commit like some time from themselves. And not just that, so that was one of the issues, exchange rates, euros and pounds. That was another issue for the committee that we are not used to deal with. So basically the price for Strimbelis is in euros, but obviously the NHS will be paying in pounds, and we have a fluctuating exchange rate. So that was another, but we need to put a number in the model. So that was another issue that we had to deal with. But during our committee meetings, all the stakeholders are invited to submit evidence and to participate. And NHS England reassured NICE and the committee that they will deal through what Giovanni mentioned, the cross-border directive. We will have an agreement with the company and the Italian healthcare provider to ensure that any uncertainty in those kind of issues will be minimized. So yeah.
Thank you, both of you. Eric.
So in the US, and then I think that this extends a bit on a global basis, I think that there are a couple of issues. If you look at it from the HTA perspective, I think that for this industry, there are three things that make these products, that people will be looking for these products. One is, are they safe? That's table stakes for any product. The two other ones is it works better and it works longer. It works better, every HTA body is able to address now. They can understand whether something works better than something else. It works longer is where the greatest uncertainty in the technology assessment side comes from, and it will require adaptive techniques and creativity to understand how methodologically to get there and what the rules of the road will look like as long-acting, long duration of therapy products come to market. I think that one thing, speaking with payers across the globe about these technologies, we're also shifting into this environment of value. So as the foundation for this entire industry, you have to put value first, because that's where the platform from which you will negotiate and address everything else. And value is easy to say and sometimes hard to get at. If you look at clinical trials, we have to move past non-inferior designs here. We have to think transformative, because if this industry is not thinking transformative, it's going to miss the mark. Because the pricing piece is a great concern, and I'm sure we'll spend some time discussing it. But in the United States, some of the health plans, the commercial plans, especially the small to mid-sized ones, the hepatitis C products practically broke the backbone of some of those small plans. And I think there are economic pressures that aren't going to be unique to this industry, but it's a compounding effect when you're going to have therapies enter that are significantly more expensive than what we've seen before, and it gets to affordability. So if you're thinking transformative, it sets you up for success right away.
Thank you, Eric. Diane?
For Belgium, I will say there are two different ways of seeing and managing the situation. The first is the classic reimbursement and access process, and we have now the experience of in Belgium of 2 ATMP which are reimbursed in our country. One was Control Select and the other one is Holger, just to be clear about what I'm talking. But as a whole, we are convinced that to face the challenge we are facing, which is not only price, but also the expertise required and so on, the way to go forward is to go for collaboration. And 2 initiatives were taken in Belgium to collaborate with other countries and other stakeholders. The first one is a sort of informal and voluntary collaboration, which is the MOCA initiative, which provide a forum where stakeholder, and by stakeholder I mean the industry, as well as patient representative and payer representative, can talk together from the very beginning of the development up to the post-marketing time to discuss about the issue related to these new drugs. What are the expectations of the payer and the HTA assessor? What sort of data are important for them, or we can answer the challenge and so on, and also what is important for the patient and what is their position. It's informal, it's not binding, but it's a very open forum where every stakeholder can put on the table what their fears are, and there is a huge trust within that forum, which I think it's important to go forward, and where we can explore new way for giving access to these very expensive drugs. So that's one initiative.
Sorry, just a question on the most, sorry if I interrupt you. So my understanding is that it's, I would say, a forum to discuss and to explore new ways, as you were just saying. I guess there is also an objective forward in terms of giving a larger group of countries across Europe or pan-European level a way to assess orphan drugs and let's say, and rely on expertise.
That's for sure.
At country level, things so.
At present, there are 13 representatives of different European countries, payer and HTA, which are part of the forum. And so there is a huge exchange of expertise and so on within the forum. But the advice that they give with regard to the development or some aspect that should be more developed and things like that are not binding for the company. It's just a place where we can openly together exchange. The next initiative from Belgium, which starts from Belgium, is the Benelux, which is a lot more formal initiative where presently 4 countries are working together in 4 domains. The first one being the horizon scanning, to be able to identify what sort of molecule or what sort of treatment are coming and represent a challenge for the access. We also exchange information together. The second domain of collaboration is to do joint HTA assessment, which means that in practice, it's a single dossier that will be submitted in these 4 countries to ask for a price and reimbursement. And so there is a common HTA assessment. The model is the UNETA type of assessment. We have already test various models to do that. And the one of the important other domain of collaboration is, of course, joint negotiation with regards to price and reimbursement. So what happened beforehand, once we have a common assessment of the value of the compound, we decide together what is our objective with regard to price and reimbursement, and then we start the negotiation with the company. At present, we are still in the pilot phase, which means that for the company, it's on a voluntary basis that they go through that process. If at one time during the process they think, okay, this is not the way we want to go, they can come back on the various national procedure and they don't lose time. But it's definitely a way to gather the expertise of the different country, because for rare disease or these type of therapy, you don't necessarily have the expertise in every single country or the center who can do it. So that's an important way to collaborate. It's also a way where we are now also discussing of a cross-border register for these type of follow-up of this disease and treatment.
You mentioned 4 countries. Can you just mention them one by one?
Yes, we start between Belgium and Netherlands. A little bit later, Luxembourg joined us, and finally Austria joined us. There are still other countries talking with us who will more than probably join us, but I cannot give the name at present. You will understand that, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Holger.
Yes, from the German payer side, we are most focused on the costs and prices. And the price level, which a sick fund will be reimbursed, will be based off the classification through the MNOC system. And when you will be successful with your dossiers and get a high additional benefit for the product, then you will be much successful in the pricing negotiation afterwards, the MNOC process. And but when you are going through the MNOC process, it's only the federal list price. It's no success to be a significant volume on the market to be prescribed or used by physicians. This regulations of the volume usually is based on the local area between the sick funds and the statutory physicians associations, how to prescribe and how to use and how it will be reimbursed for patients. For example, such a possibility between to travel Germans to Italy to get treated is not possible, because they have to request in advance the reimbursement, and usually we have a full possibility of treatment in Germany by ourselves. So it's not necessary for patients to go abroad. And that's make it...
so in this specific case for Strimbelis, let's say, so this is an ultra-orphan disease. There are no treatments for this disease, right? So these children, they don't have any alternative. And there is just one site in Europe that is authorized to administer, the drug by EMA. So in this case, you don't have an alternative in Germany. How do the system, let's say, manage to find a solution for this patient?
The very important fact also is that you need the Specialist Physicians Association behind you as a manufacturer. When you don't get the positive proposal to the local physicians to use several pharmaceuticals, it's not very common for the physician to use it, because they get the problem to be reimbursed already, and on the regional level, when they prescribe it, we have also one regulation that will be economical punishment for physicians. When you prescribe too much in an average compared with his physician colleagues, then he gets be in the economic risk to pay back this money out of his own pocket. and that make the behavior to prescribe very friendly, very close.
So I guess there are some constraints due to the system, legislation, regulations in Germany that make these things difficult, or made these things difficult. I mean, to move patients from one country to another, complicated so far. Do you see a way forward in terms of legislation or policies or regulations that can change things in a way that we can find solutions for these patients?
We need solutions. We are at the moment in a situation where we have no answers to these problems and for the new products which are in the pipeline. And you see what happened with Evidera. Now it's off the market, and only one patient was treated by it. And we get the federal elections on September, and the new government isn't built already. And it depends what kind of party will bring the new health minister.
Okay. Thank you. Wanted to start back the tour, and now I would like to really focus on more, let's say, briefly on more technical aspects. Let's say, for example, specific to ATMPs, like in the data requirements or how payers address uncertainty of reimbursing or treating the patients now for a promise of a long-term effect that, let's say, it's a typical expected outcome for gene therapies, but for many other ATMPs. So we face a pipeline of products that are very promising, many successful so far, studies that are relatively small in size, sometimes studies with single arm, so with no comparator. So it will be interesting for the audience, for all of us, to understand how your authorities have gone through the process of, let's say, adapting their methods and the standards to interpret the evidence, and what is the advice that you will give to companies, in terms of improving their effort in terms of developing evidence for your reviews. Pilar, please.
If I may just start. I think that, I presume that most of you will agree with me, the key thing is continuous evidence development. So we are now being asked to make our decisions earlier and earlier, and it's not just the fact that the evidence that is coming is much more limited, but what we are talking about is about promising things that potentially may have high benefits for patients, but come with a really high cost, with a really high uncertainty. So committees are more than used to deal with uncertainty, but perhaps we need to be a little bit more flexible about ways to approach that uncertainty in order to reduce it and to make possible those decisions and access to those products in the NHS and to see those benefits in the patient at the end of the day. So quantifying uncertainty is some of the things that we are considering in a more quantitative way. Also the use of different discounts rates, for example, that have a very high impact on the cost-effectiveness results. And to be fair, apart from continuous evidence development and ensure that that evidence is not being stopped as soon as the product enters the market, committees will also welcome to see creative payment models that both the NHS and companies are willing to agree on in order to ensure access to those therapies.
Thank you.
I would add that I totally agree with the idea of the continuous evidence generation. This is extremely important for these therapies. Uncertainties with these therapies are not only related to the to the study design, which of course is important, but also there are of course other uncertainties related to the long-term efficacy, safety, to the uncertainties on the long life benefits. So is one administration enough, especially for cell therapies, or do we need more? These are uncertainties that we have to deal with when deciding the reimbursability. What I can say is that possible tool is the use of the managed entry agreements that we've been using a lot at the national level, which is based on the idea that you share the risk with the manufacturer. So basically US NHS share the risk with the manufacturer. So you basically reimburse the product based on the outcome. So you use a registry to track all patients, and then based on that you can measure, who's going to respond and who's not going to respond, and then based on that, let's say that the NHS covers the responders while the manufacturer covers the non-responders. This seems very easy. It's a very complex process. It needs to be matched with registries, but still, it is a way that so far we've been using to guarantee access and to sort of balance access to the costs for the system. I also I wanted to add that there is another important aspect, and I'm sure Pilar agrees with me because we've been involved in a lot of scientific advice procedures together, is the idea of an early dialogue with the payers, with the HTA bodies, to discuss the evidence requirements, because it's important to start very early discussing about the study design, presenting the product, and trying to find some sort of an agreement to discuss the details of the study design with the HTAs. And there's, for example, ongoing now a project of, I won't disclose too many details because it is confidential, but this is an aspect of a collaboration between HTAs and regulators. There's a project, for example, on collaboration on a registry which is going to be based on a network of transplant centers, and this is something that is coming, so it shows the investment and the efforts that we as HTAs are doing in setting up tools for continuous evidence generation.
Thank you, Giovanni. Eric?
I think in the United States, one of the challenges you have is that you have dozens, if not hundreds, of payers to contend with, and they all have their own way of looking at things. I think the conditional coverage with evidence development is certainly a way that would need to be considered more broadly, but at CMS, for the public side, that's a possibility, even though it's only been applied a handful of times, say less than 20 over the entire expanse of that process. When you look at the commercial side, there's no such thing. There is no conditional coverage. Even if it makes intuitive sense, we're not there. So you have two options. The first option is make sure you have as much outcomes data on your patient population as you can. Don't leave any stone unturned. From the first moment your product hits a patient, follow them. And using the example of Strimvelis, which was a very unusual situation, at the time that product went to market, it had 9 to 10 years worth of data, albeit for a small patient population, which will be very difficult to replicate on average. I think everybody would agree. But if your claim is that this is a transformative or curative therapy that's going to work beyond what a conventional trial timeline is, every advantage you have from following and collecting that data will be critical. You can't pack all the outcomes into your clinical trial, although there have been plenty of examples. If you look at precision medicine and the IO therapy initial entrants, one that had a companion diagnostic and one that didn't, one that went very narrow with the patient population they targeted and had a much more transformative effect than one that went broad. In this industry, how you target your patients is equally important. You're going to want to look at the subpopulations where you have the greatest potential for responders, and I think really have that comprehensive story to be able to address some of the uncertainty that comes here, because the HTA process in the U.S. itself, will be quote-unquote sufficient aside from that element of timeline uncertainty. And I think most HTA bodies would say that. I think the environment is certainly more open to dialogue. I think every HTA body globally is becoming more open to dialogue because we're seeing a proliferation of products and creative solutions, partnerships coming into play. If your therapy is inpatient, it also in the United States creates a whole different dimension, because if you have a very expensive therapy that has no DRG or case rate associated with it, then you also not only will have to make a case to payers, you will have to make a case to providers. And if those providers, a hospital administrator, don't see the ROI, they'll never uptake the therapy in many cases. So it just increases the complexity of how you think about underscoring burden of illness and wrapping all of your evidence around your clinical study to be able to appeal to these multiple stakeholders that play a role in the value chain.
Thank you. Diane.
I agree to most of what was said by my colleague, but I want to add perhaps to comment. Yes, in Belgium we definitely use more and more managed entry agreement, no doubt about that. But at the same time, it's probably not the solution as such, and we need to think out of the box and find new way to work with the industry, and probably look more for a sort of partnership public-private to be able to face the challenge we are facing with regard to price and cost. The other important comment I would like to make related to not only the managed entry agreement but also the conditional approval. There is commitment at that time for a company to provide additional data, but if these additional data don't come or don't come on time, there is most of the time no sanction, or sanctions are very difficult. Once you have given access to a drug to patient, withdraw that access is nearly impossible. And I think the company know that, and so we need to address that problem. What happens when the commitments are not fulfilled?
Yeah, the most important I already said is the classification of the AMNOG system and the GBA, and it's based how successful your dossier will be. And it depends also how will be the outcome, the data, also how many patients will be part of the trial. And if the number of patients are too low or the comparator of the treatment is not, it's only a placebo treatment, you will never be successful. It could be also that when you have only a new pharmaceutical for a special disease, and the standard treatment will be a surgery, then the surgery price will be your standard treatment. And also one big mistake of the providers is of the trials not to explain the beside costs of the treatment, and they only often propose the price for the pharmaceuticals, but that's not all. And that's also a very important fact to get the different of additional benefit. And the GBA punish the dossier when you get a worse additional benefit or a not proved additional benefit. And that's make it push you down in the pricing negotiation to the standard treatment. And that's make it quite difficult to discuss during this price negotiations, because in this part of pricing, the payer side would never discuss anymore about the outcomes for the patients. It's finished and by the GBA decision. And yeah, it's only a pricing and economic discussion, and that make it. I saw quite a lot that the providers try to discuss about the outcomes during the price negotiation. Okay, it will be finished.
Thank you, Holger. I'd like to ask a last question before moving to the Q&A part of this panel. We have gone through the notion of investment from a payer perspective. So investment means that you have a need to understand what you're investing on, what are going to be the benefit in the short and the longer term, and also in terms of how you're, as a payer, your monetary investment is going to face the risk compared to the return, if we want to use investment terminology. So we know that gene therapies, you have a one-off treatment often. You may have an upfront payment or not. So there have been a lot of discussion around new payment models, and you have already mentioned this. So ways to, let's say, distribute the risk for the payer over time, paying on an annuity basis, so year by year, a portion of the total cost of these treatments, and while monitoring, measuring the outcome. So I would like to get from you a quick view, also looking forward in terms of what will happen in the months and the years to come. From your country standpoint, how likely that this kind of approaches are going to happen, if there are discussions, and what is needed to be done to have these new contracting approaches put in place, if at all? Maybe we can start with Pilar.
Sure. So I concur with what my fellow panelists said before. So managed access agreements are certainly, there certainly have a room for ATMPs, but they are not easy to implement. The ensuring of the data collection, while the risk in terms of financial risk is shared, is not easy to get that agreement. So we have some experience with those managed access agreements, and the key thing is, I think that one of the key things is definitely the agreement that needs to be signed by all stakeholders. So there needs to be an agreement that if the treatment is not delivering whatever is supposed to deliver, reimbursement will be stopped. And the experience that we have so far with managed access agreements, for example, in the context of highly specialized technologies, we ask patients' organizations to sign that agreement. So therefore, even patients understand that if they don't go to provide the data together working with their clinicians, and if that data is not provided to the NHS, we cannot assess whether the benefits are being delivered to patients. And so reimbursement will be stopped. But in terms of different ways of managed access agreements or different types, obviously those managed access agreements are agreed in confidence. But for example, through that project, that mock appraisal that we conducted, we explored different innovative payment models. Some of them were payment by outcomes, only paying those that have responded to therapy. Or we also explore lifetime license mechanisms in payment by month, as long as the benefits last. In this case of, for example, in the mock appraisal was a CAR-T therapy, and therefore it was assumed that benefits will last until death. So we see this working. We think that both the NHS and companies needs to talk earlier, and we as NICE provide that opportunity to allow that dialogue to happen through our Office for Market Access or our commercial unit. And we are also implementing managed access agreement through the Cancer Drugs Fund. So we are seeing them working. So far for ATMPs, they haven't been needed. That's the truth. So all ATMPs, all cell and gene therapies that we've evaluated or appraised have been recommended with a single patient access scheme that we've been working for many years now. And for Strimbelis, in the draft recommendations, not even a patient access scheme was needed for recommendations. But yeah, we certainly see a room for them in ATMPs.
Sorry, we have 5 minutes left, so I'm sorry to put some time pressure on you.
So no, I totally agree that managed agreements are not like the magic solution to the issue of sustainability and balancing access with sustainability. There are a tool that can be used, but absolutely I think it's important to make efforts to recognize the value of a product. As I said before, what we've been trying to do now with this new criteria for innovation is to try to define the value through this criteria and to be transparent on that, because we will soon be publishing reports explaining why we think a product is innovative and a rationale behind. Certainly, I think there's a need right now to try to identify, to be a little bit creative, as we said before, about new pricing systems. This is obvious also in light of the new, let's say, regulatory pathway that are coming with the adaptive pathway and all that. It's important to try to identify ways of, guaranteeing access, being flexible, and at the same time, of course, considering the impact on the budget.
Thank you.
I think in the U.S., again, we couldn't devise a more complicated system in the U.S. if we tried to, but I think that the issues, the options will be there won't be an amortization model for payout. Right now, if it's something slid across a payer's desk today, they would have to pay for it right up front. The next option that they're open to considering is a 2 to 3 year payout scheme for the commercial side, because that deals with beneficiary churn. So the issue that you don't have with conventional treatments is something like you could institute a stop clause. Over that 2 to 3 year window, if it stops working, we stop paying. The reason that Spinraza that Raffel mentioned, it was $750,000 entry. The reason it was palatable is because that $750,000 broke into 3 payments across a year. So from a cash flow perspective, it was easier to handle. And I think that if you blow it up to the European level or the global level, the issue you want to think about is what kind of payment models may be possible, because what those look like will directly impact your forecast and your ROI, and you have to be able to do some more complicated scenario analysis to think through it, because we're still in the early days of these models panning out.
So I guess Diane, sorry if I got you short, but you cover already the market.
The only thing that I want perhaps to add is that with regard to delayed reimbursement, they are thinking about it in Belgium, because we had a request and things like that, but we are very cautious about it, thinking that we cannot preclude the budget for the future, and that it's the next generation who will have to pay for what we decide today. So we have to be very cautious about it.
Thank you.
I agree. We need for Germany also different contracting and payment possibilities, and the payer side starts to collect experiences with several contracts. But we have the same problem like Belgium, and when we also, it's very common in Germany now to use rebate contracts on pharmaceuticals, especially after the European Court opened the open house contracting process in advance to the rebate contract. That will be at the moment the major point for the payer sides. But one problem, for example, payment by outcome, who will monitor it? The outcome, and who will measure it, who will prove it, and that will be the problem, because the data are not in the in-house of the payers forces to monitor by themselves, and so we need step by step, and it will be a slowly development of new contracting.
I think the other thing, just very quickly, that hasn't really been mentioned but is important, and including from a policy level here, is would there be a special fund like the Oncology Drug Fund in a certain market that can cover this, or will there be a risk pool? And if you have a pool, you have to define who's in and who's out, and is it going to be based on something like RMAT designation or curative or transformative or something else? We don't know yet, but those are 2 other options.
Thank you, Eric. I don't know if there is... Okay, so sorry, there is no time for questions. I take full responsibility, but you will have time during the break to ask direct questions to these panelists. Thank you very much for...